Noelle, welcome to Mike's Search for Meaning.
Thanks, Mike. It's great to be here.
It's so great to have you. And as we were saying before we hit record, anytime I have a member of the RPC on the podcast, I know that I'm going to be in for a good one. And I'm excited to explore all the things with you today. And the first thing that I would like to explore, I think if you've listened to a couple of the episodes already, you'll know what's coming. And the first question I like to start with is, what was it like at your dinner table when you were growing up?
Mm, Such a good question. Um, well, I'll start by saying this. It wasn't until like my mid-teens going to dinner at other people's houses where I learned that not everyone talked exclusively about current events and international affairs at the dinner table. I was like, wait, you guys talk about soccer games and what you did at school? And that's partly a function of my mom is an immigrant. She's from Belgium. So like we kind of grew up with this like much more expanded view of the world. And then my father is an international affairs expert and like worked in the White House and the Pentagon.
Hmm.
And my parents are obsessed with the news still. And that was like a really big part of our household. Like I was watching Peter Jennings with my dad when I was 2, I think, and that was like our bonding time. And so yeah, a lot of what we talked about at the dinner table was what was going on in the world and what was going on, politically in the U.S. And then also, in the broader sphere. And my dad's a Middle East specialist, so lots about the Middle East as well.
Hmm. Yeah, it's so interesting. And would you say, I think there's two curiosities I have. What were you like as a child? It doesn't have to be super young, but just generally, what would you say your essence was when you were younger? And were your parents encouraging of you to be who you were? Did you feel pressure to be a certain way or anything?
Good question. I definitely was like a big play outside kind of kid. Like I remember always wanting to try to build dams in this creek. That was a big activity for me. I was really into animals, and really into art, and also sang a lot. I was really into music. Yeah, the rest of my family's tone deaf, so it took a while before I realized that I wasn't. And so it wasn't really discouraged, but it wasn't really like encouraged. It's not like I grew up in a musical family. And I think my parents were like art is great and it's not going to pay the bills,
Hmm.
so I wanted to go to art school, and my parents like really tried to sort of discourage me from that, which
Hmm.
I think ultimately I'm okay with. There were benefits to that, definitely, and I still got to do a lot of art. So yeah, I don't know. I wonder like what would it have been like to grow up in a family where they're like, oh, like let's nourish your intuition. What does it feel like to be in your body? I mean, I can't even imagine. That would have been amazing. But I think that's a big ask for that generation in general.
Yeah, and how I guess you actually already answered this, so I'll scratch. But you described yourself a little bit as a child that you were outdoorsy, and where did that lead you? It sounded like in a lot of ways you were encouraged to be yourself. It wasn't like you were super suppressed or repressed in any way, but there was also a an acknowledgement of those are beautiful things, but not going to be what actually pays the bills. So you're not going to school for that. How did that inform the way that you decided to move into your professional life? Before we're going to spend most of the conversation, of course, talking about what you're up to now and all the beautiful work that you do, but how did it inform your initial career steps?
I mean, it's not like I think, like I didn't end up in accounting, right? Which would have been a really practical career choice. But I like because of the influence of my father and his work and being interested in that, I initially thought that I wanted to do international development work. And then I had the opportunity to spend a summer while I was in college interning in Palestine, in the West Bank, and got to go to Gaza and got to see like I was working with one of the oldest Palestinian aid organizations and got to see kind of really up close like what aid work looks like and like the dark side and the beauty of it. And one of my colleagues there really helped me understand. He's like, yeah, like our work is helping people have better lives, and it's totally enabling the occupation because we're taking care of these people that wouldn't otherwise be taken care of. And I think that was like a really big moment for me. That, and then being in meetings with a bunch of other aid groups kind of from all over the world. They were all kind of trying to do the same thing and kind of competing for different resources. And I was just like, no, thank you. Like, this is like a really emotionally complicated space to be in. I think that was also my first real introduction to trauma was meeting kids that had grown up in a war zone. And I think, you know, I was 20, so I wasn't like totally didn't understand myself super well yet, but I think I understood that as a sensitive person, like that was not a good career choice for me, that was just going to chew me up and destroy me. So and then I thought, okay, I'll like work in human rights in a different way. I applied to a bunch of jobs in that field, didn't get any of them, and ended up in this program called Green Corps, where they pay you to travel around the country and work on environmental campaigns, and they train you how to organize at the same time. And it's funny, I showed up to the interview, I was like, I didn't really I'd never worked on environmental stuff. I really didn't give a shit about the environment, but I was like, climate change is a problem. So like I read the IPCC report the day before the interview and like somehow sold them on my ability to work on environmental stuff. And so that kind of set me up on this path to do organizing work, which I'm very grateful for. But yeah, it wasn't like my immigrant mother, you know, was not pleased with that choice either. And has always sort of been baffled by my career choices. But that's where I started.
Yeah, I'm actually intrigued. So there's already an acknowledgement that without your full parents' approval, you were still able to choose the career that you wanted to go with, at least initially. And I'm curious where that came from. Was it a self-trust? Did you have, I don't know, community of people around you that supported it? Like how did you have the wherewithal, even at a young age, to go against what maybe your parents were prescribing to you?
Well, part of it is that they weren't really prescribing anything. You know, they were like sort of, I think, like loosely saying, you know, like maybe don't do this, but yeah, like I talked about my mom being an immigrant mother, but she was never like be a doctor or a lawyer, which I'm very grateful for. And, you know, my dad like always, you know, was a big believer in public service and like being a rabble rouser and being a rebel, like, and both my parents are rebels, right? They both left where they came from, like pretty early. They met in DC, and like, so that, and yeah, my brother and I grew up rebels too. So like that's, I think that actually was encouraged. And so that was probably why I was like, I'm just going to do this because I feel called to do this. I was also really angry when I was young. I was just like, capitalism is so effed, and like, what are we doing about it? And nobody cares. And like, that was really devastating to me. So it just felt really important, you know, to try to like help, you know, and I don't agree with this anymore necessarily, but I was like, we got to get more people to understand like how effed everything is, and like we got to change it. And I mean, there was a point where I was like, I think armed revolution is the answer. Like I just like I like went through the whole spectrum of like, how do we change the world? How do we change America? I think that was the interesting part about working in Palestine was like, oh, like actually like the problems are in America. Like I need to work in America. So that's like, I don't know. That's what I was motivated by, not really by like career You know,
Hmm.
I wish that somebody maybe had talked to me a little bit more about that. Like, if you want to have a house when you grow up, these are some things that you should think about now. That would have been useful, but unfortunately or fortunately, I'm not sure, that was never my orientation.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
Mhm.
Yeah, so there's plenty of stuff in there that I think we'll circle back on in the rest of the conversation. But I would love to hear. I know this is a pretty big question, and there's probably a lot of things that we won't get to today that factored into this. But what brought you into coaching? I know that around 2015 or so, you took the, I don't know if this took the plunge or you made the pivot into coaching, and yeah, would love to hear what was what was bringing you into coaching at that point in your life?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I guess I'll give like brief context. So I have been living with chronic illness for most of my adult life. So last 22 years, got sick initially in high school. And when I was about to turn 30, I I had actually stopped working for the first time. I'd been like pushing myself to work as a sick person for a really long time. And I was like, I need a break. Somebody help me have a break. And was able to live with my family for 8 months. But I was like 30, like on my parents' couch, unemployed, like turning 30. And I was just like, I gotta figure something out. Like, I had been in this cycle of starting jobs that I loved and then getting sick and then having to leave. And I think I did that, I don't know, 3 or 4 times.
Wow.
And yeah, and I was like, there's gotta be a way to do good work in the world and not be sick, or like there's got to be a way to do good work and heal. So I used the last of my savings to hire this coach, Jeremy Blanchard, who had been a climate organizer turned coach. And so I sort of knew where he was coming from and I trusted him. And I was looking, yeah, I was considering the idea of starting my own business as maybe a way to survive. And just a few sessions in, I was just like, this is it. This is for me. I'm obsessed with this. In part because Jeremy's coaching helped me have some really big breakthroughs pretty immediately, like asking for support.
Mhm. Mhm.
Felt really impossible. And then all of a sudden I was starting to do it. And I saw this huge opportunity to support other people with health challenges and other organizers, other people that did political work, and the intersection of the two. And so I thought, this is a lifestyle that would allow me to support people that I really want to support, maybe not be in the movement, but be movement adjacent, and also have a lot of flexibility. So when I launched my practice, Mike, I would literally do a coaching call, take a nap, do another coaching call, like get in the bathtub, like go to a doctor's appointment. Like
Mhm.
it was very much like I used, the 3 hours of energy that I had to
Mhm.
work, and then like was just like a pancake the rest of the time.
Yeah.
But it allowed me to eventually, you know, get a lot better.
Mhm. And again, a big question here, and we don't need to get into all of the nitty gritty details. But what would you say has been most supportive for you in your healing journey? Because I'm imagining now you're not only spending 3 hours able to function and then going to doctors and going to bed being a pancake for the whole day. So what has been really supportive for you in your healing journey, and from there then we can start to open the door on all the other beautiful topics we have teed up.
Thank you. Um, yeah, I mean, it's definitely more of a silver buckshot than a silver bullet situation.
Hmm.
Um, I'd say working with Ishita, who was another guest on your podcast, was a pretty pivotal turning point for me in my healing journey, um, which is a few years ago. And I think, and actually, while working with her, I got a lot better and was like almost 100% for like a couple years. And then I got the COVID vaccine and had a huge relapse. So like the last year and a half, I have been much more of a pancake. But I think more recently, what's been really supportive for me is seeing that, seeing my healing as my life's work
Mhm.
and framing it that way. Because I think what something that I've struggled with off and on is feeling like my healing gets in the way of everything that I want to
Mhm.
do, which like doesn't create opportunity for wholeness at all. And it's just it creates like a lot of I don't know, difficult energy for me and everybody in my life. Um, and I sort of I've had this sort of envy, I think, of people who really are able to really honor their gifts and really I've been really interested in practice
Mhm.
lately. Like I know like Prentice Hemphill and Adrienne Marie Brown talk about like what are you practicing?
Mhm.
And I've always really admired people who get up every day and practice their gift and their contribution. And I realized like I could just do that if I accept that my healing is my life's work, and then it allows me to find joy in practicing healing every day.
Mm.
So that's been a pretty phenomenal breakthrough, just shifting my view on that.
Yeah, it's been a huge breakthrough for me as well. There's certainly been many points in my life where I looked at healing as something that would have a completion date at some point,
If
and
only, right?
if only. Well, there's I was just watching a talk that that Thomas Hubel gave at the Next Practice Institute, and he said anytime that you're asking how long is this going to take, you know that you're not actually present and that you're probably
Mm,
efforting your way through something. And that's been a huge part of my healing journey is uh, recognizing when I'm in the how long is this going to take energy, and
mm,
realizing what getting curious about what that is, and coming back to center and realizing that healing is an ongoing journey. There isn't a pinnacle or a certain spot that we get to in our life where it isn't a practice. At least that's the realization that it sounds like you and I have both come to. It is something that we get to do moment by moment, day by day, and there's never ending layers. And yeah, I think this is actually a beautiful on ramp into all the things that you have teed up. Part of me wants to just offer the menu of things that you have with anti-capitalist career coaching, and then maybe coaching around queerness and disability. But yeah, I'll actually do that. So what feels most alive for you in terms of what you would want to discuss right now?
hmm. Yeah, I mean, I guess I could talk a little bit about yeah, what's up in my coaching practice right now.
Yeah.
Because I think it's always sweet to talk to other coaches. Like, what are you seeing in your clients? Like, what are people bringing? What's coming up?
Hmm.
Um, and uh, yeah, I think, and I can say a little bit about sort of where I'm coming from. Like, I had beautiful coach training 7 years ago. That's this like ontological coaching model that I love with the Academy for Coaching Excellence. Um, but I saw pretty quickly that working with people with health challenges in particular, that uh, just working with the mind wasn't going to cut it.
Hmm.
Um, and so I think so I have brought into my coaching work both some somatic stuff and then uh, a lot of intuition work, which I
Hmm.
guess you could say is somatic, but I sort of think of it as more of a spiritual
Hmm.
piece. So in my work, I am always looking to support people to kind of get into their bodies more fully so that they can more fully access their intuition. And um and I think like part of where the anti-capitalist piece comes in is it's like I think it can be really supportive when people are naming some of their internal conversations that are holding them back. It can be really helpful to say, cool, and like that's just internalized capitalism, or that's internalized homophobia, or ableism, because then it's that much easier to say, okay, that's not me. And then it creates space to say, what is me? And then how do you get to the what is me is by being in touch with your intuition. But it's interesting. I had a client recently who kind of brought me a different scenario where she was saying, in the past, like I've just made these kind of quick instinctual decisions without using my cognitive mind. And my intuition is saying this, but I don't want to just trust that.
Yeah.
So then we were looking together at, okay, so what does the cognitive mind need to know to be able to trust that? And it's like, okay, so like, yeah, let's crunch some numbers. Let's figure out the budget. Like, let's do all the things that the brain needs to trust this intuitive piece. And that was super fun, because I think a lot of the people that I work with are really in their brains. And so it's like just like touching the intuition is so important. And another thing I've been seeing, and I'm sure you've been seeing this too, is this kind of moment we're in, and, you know, so-called post-pandemic, where people are in a lot of ways, like, I hate to say this, but like, quote unquote, going back to normal, right? Like traveling again, working in offices again, etc., but haven't in their bodies integrated the experience of lockdown or the grief of that or the loss. And it's palpable, the sort of the misalignment and incoherence that so many people are living. And so it's, with a lot of my clients, it's felt really important to say, you know, I know you're looking for a job, or you're trying to change your career, or you're trying to have this breakthrough, but we really, really actually need to get you back in your body, because that's like, there's no, like, all that other stuff's going to feel really, really hard, and it's going to feel hard to get clarity on what you need if that connection isn't there. So, and that's been a fun thing to work with folks on.
I would love to hear, well, I have one reflection that I think is really interesting. I don't think I've heard it articulated quite like this before, that I think there's a big movement, a lot of coaches I hear, or thought leaders who are interested in human potential and human development, talk about integrating the mind and the body. And it's usually from a place of someone's too much in their head and we need to get them back in their body. And I think it's an interesting point to bring up, that some people are really in their body, but haven't figured out how to enroll their mind in the process. And yeah, I name that partly as a reminder to myself that my mind has a very important role. There's nothing wrong with spreadsheets and analyzing and having a budget. Like, those are beautiful things. And I don't want to denigrate the mind, but that said, a lot of people that I have come in contact with too, that I provide support to, or that are close friends or family of mine, very much have lived most of their life in their head. And just the saying, or the speaking of, we need to get back in our body, a lot of times creates some sort of resistance, or the mind will then click in, like, what does that even mean? That certainly has been true. That was true for me at various points in my journey. So I would love to hear, if you talk about somatics, and maybe you're working with a very heady client, someone who has, you know, they've kind of brained their way through most of their life.
I love that.
What where would you go with them? Like, what would getting into their body look like in maybe a conversation, or it could be practices that you would invite them into? Anything at all that you feel is relevant?
Sure. Yeah, I think first I'll say that something that's a learning edge for me, where I'm trying to challenge myself, is to bring in my practice, in my language, and in my work with clients, kind of bottom up approaches to embodiment versus top down. I think even saying get in your body actually is like, you have to get in your body, like that's a brain thing. And and I think that and it also, it kind of maybe perpetuates the separation the false separation, that there's our
Mhm.
brain and our body, and like
Mhm.
we have to bring them back together when actually it's just all everything all the time. It's
Mhm.
all there. Um, so I just wanted to name that because that's something that I'm working on myself and still catching myself on. Um, yeah, so I don't know if this is just the people that I attract in my practice or if this is true more broadly, but I find that a lot of people actually in the right container have pretty quick access to their intuition.
Mm.
And so I might do some breathing or grounding exercises with somebody, or if they're sort of dorsal vagal, like more like down regulated, maybe we'll jump up and down for a while, or like hit a pillow around or something, and then invite them to come back to their bodies. And sometimes I learned this from Katina Makris, who's a pretty awesome spiritual healer, Lyme disease survivor, using the chakras as a you can use them as a diagnostic tool, but also as like ways to connect with specific I guess I'll say essences or elements of our being. So if somebody is trying to um, answer a question about, I don't know, how they're going to work out or how they're going to get themselves back into yoga, maybe we'll ask their third chakra, their solar plexus. And so I'll say, put your hand, above your belly button, close your eyes, take a few deep breaths, and just ask this part of you, like, what does getting back into your body look like? Or
Mhm.
how does your body want to get back into fitness or something like that? And if somebody has a question about relationships, then we'll do second chakra, so lower belly. If it's something like this person feels like they are not speaking up, they're not standing up for themselves, they don't feel seen or heard, then we would do throat. And Mike, it's like this, like 90% of the time.
Wow.
And it's funny too, people will I'll invite people to just observe, or notice, maybe you hear things, maybe you see things, maybe you experience sensations, maybe you get a word, maybe a sound, and certain universal things will come up. Like I had a client, she put her hand on her heart and she's like, I'm just feeling green. And like green is the color of the heart chakra.
Mm.
Anyway, it's just like fun, wild stuff that comes up like that. And so that's something that works a lot. Like I do a workshop on helping people really figure out what they want to do for work, what they want to do in their careers. And I actually walk them through some of this so that they have their mental picture of what they want their career to look like. And it's like, okay, cool. Like, let's ask your body what it wants. And sometimes there's alignment, and then sometimes it's completely different.
Mm.
And so it's really interesting to work with folks on like what's going on there when it's really different. And then when, it creates really interesting conversations. Um, and then I'm also a trained yoga teacher. So sometimes I just straight up do yoga with people,
Mhm.
or restorative poses or that kind of thing.
Mm. I love that. So I'm wanting to connect a couple of dots right now. I think this could be an interesting little segue. You named that early on in your career, there was a lot of like, what's wrong with the world type of energy, right? There's a lot of anger and it's like all the systems are fucked, everything's broken. What are we supposed to do? I'm wondering how, like, I think with hindsight, we know in this current moment that our emotions and everything really that is within us is signposting us towards something.
Mm.
And I would love to hear how you could do this either way, how you've integrated that anger in your life around like the system's broken. I'm anti-capitalism. All the systems are fucked, basically. How have you integrated that so that it's not coming from as much of a reactive place and maybe more responsive? And how do you support folks in doing that as well?
Mm, yeah, I love this question. Um, I think something that I love that has been so important in my journey and that I love supporting other people with is really figuring out what their role is in supporting our human family, I'll say.
Mm,
Um, because I really do believe there is a role for everybody, and like the best way for somebody to support a social change movement might be to provide childcare for somebody that's doing something else, or baking a pie for an elder. You know, I really, and I think Adrienne Marie Brown's book Emergent Strategy really gave me permission to lean into that more. I think I had that feeling. I think she provided that for a lot of people, right? She named a lot of things that a lot of people were feeling like, we are in apocalypse, and building relationships is how we're going to survive. And and I guess I'll say, so inspired by that book, and then also I am really sad that I can't think of the name of the person who created it right now, but there's a tool that has sort of a wheel of different roles that are needed in social change movements, and it's like one of them is a healer, one of them is a weaver, like somebody who brings different things together. There's one that's like, I don't think it's activist, but something like that. I'll try to figure out what it is so we can put it in the show notes. And it's on my Instagram somewhere. And that sort of had me thinking, okay, like what is my role? And I think, and I actually got to go to, so Adrienne led these emergent strategy immersions. And I got to go to the second one that she led in Detroit, which was hands down the most incredible experience of my life. And one of my goals in going there for myself, was to get clear on my role in the movement. And this wasn't that long ago. I think this was like 2018. And it was so clear to me, being in that room for a few days, that my role in the movement is as a healer. But it took, I don't know, 15 years to admit that. And that was after so much trying to be an organizer, and so much guilt and shame, even though my body kept telling me, like, you can't do it that way. Like I was like the board president of a nonprofit in my 20s, and just like, always sort of trying to get back into activism or political work or organizing work. And then my body kept saying, no, no, no. So that was a really big piece for me. And just, so in the last few years, I've really just been like, okay, how do I support the world from this role with these things that I have to offer? And it's been a much better fit. For sure. But I mean, it's also uncomfortable, right? Like, I don't know if you've experienced this or people that you've worked with, but to say, I'm a healer.
Yeah. That feels very raw for me. It feels alive in a lot of ways. Like, I imagine that if I were, well, at first I want to name also. Is it Prochaska and Di Clemente? Is that who
That
you're
sounds
missing?
right. Yeah.
Yeah. And the stages, is it the stages of change? I want to make sure that I link it correctly in the show notes. I have it pulled up right here. If so,
I would have to see it visually to know for sure.
okay.
Okay.
Well, either way, I'll get back to it. I'll link into the show notes with the correct attribution and the different ways, including
Yeah.
healer, activist, organizer.
I can try to pull it up right now, Mike,
Okay,
and then we will just know.
sounds good. I'll say on my end, I have a pretty strong feeling that healer would be where I would land as well. And also, I have all sorts of narratives, internal narratives and stories about what that means, and am I really qualified to do that, and who am I to be a healer? What am I really best at? So I know that it could be a really a juicy subject. If you have it pulled up, you feel free to interject.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's what's your social change role? And
Hmm.
then Deepa Iyer is the creator
Got it.
of it. And it's experimenters, frontline responders, visionaries, builders, caregivers, disruptors, healers, storytellers, guides, and weavers.
Hmm. Beautiful. I also love within your explanation. I love the invitation that to be making a social impact. It could be as simple as making a pie for someone who's elderly, right? There's a way that I certainly, given my conditioning, I think about impact as this big a word that means like at scale. I'm reaching thousands, millions of people or whatever, and it's even if that is the case, impact always starts one relationship at a time. And actually, I think it starts with the self, which we've really been explaining in so many ways already. And yeah, let me get in touch with. I had a question in there that I am losing. Oh, this might sound like a little bit obtuse, but I'm wondering how you came to. You said it was really evident that healer was where you belonged, and I'm wondering how you came to that realization. Like, what did it look like within you to realize that?
I'm smiling because I was thinking about this the other day. Um, Part of it was I was in this room with I think like 70 other people, and I wanted to just like touch everybody in the room.
Hmm.
And I had like recently just started experimenting with like hands-on energy work. And yeah, I just like had this like overwhelming desire to touch everyone.
Hmm.
And I
Hmm.
was like, that's weird. And so I just sort of started like sitting with, what was that? What was that about? And then there were some really incredible healers in that room. Um, and part of what Adrienne had us do is she split us all up into groups and then had each group create an offering based on the principles of emergent strategy. So each group had a principle. And then each group also had like we had created we had come up with a list of like social change issues, for lack of a better term, that we wanted to work on. So each group had an issue and a principle, and then you were supposed to create something for the wider group. And there were several healers in my group. And I was just like, oh, like, but like really deeply committed to change. Yeah, like one of them was an indigenous trained naturopath, and some of the work they do is making plant medicine accessible for BIPOC folks that might not otherwise have access to it. Like just really badass people, and I was just like these are my people. Like I'm not there, but that's where I want. Like I want to be offering like that kind of stuff, and just people that are really engaged in healing justice. Um, and then the offering that my group ended up offering was very healing focused, although I think kind of they all were in one respect or another. And then yeah, I think it was, there were people there that I had never been in a room with so many folks who work on Black liberation,
Mm.
and seeing how much healing was a part of their work by necessity, and how deeply they lived it. They lived like a healing centered focus in everything they were doing. It was really, really inspiring to me. And I've been so grateful for that experience, and that I think has continued to to shape my work is seeing that those things are one, that you cannot, I mean, I already knew that intellectually, but like to see it, that like you can't do change work if you're not doing healing work. Like they're the same thing. And I think that's shaped this manuscript that I've been working on too. It's like you can't have one without the other, and really looking at the other side of that like you actually can't have healing happen if you're not thinking about justice and change as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I would love to dive right into that, and we can do that through the lens of your book, Healing as a Contribution. We also, yeah, I mean, we can start there. I don't want to throw too much your way. So, yeah, how is healing connected to justice in the way that you write about it and the way that you've already teed it up and are the way that you see it?
Yeah, thank you for asking. I am still practicing talking about the book in concise and clear ways. But I think I'll say, especially early, there's a bunch of books actually that have come out in the last couple of years that are very much aligned with mine, which at first I was like, God, like people are gonna steal my ideas and stuff, but like I'm totally over that now. It's beautiful. People are really a lot of people are lifting up this conversation in a beautiful way, that these things are really integrated. Like there's a book, Inflamed, Carrie Kelly's recent book, American Detox, Gabor Mate's new book, The Myth of Normal. Like there's a lot of those themes in what I'm working on too. And what I was frustrated by, especially early on in my healing journey, was that the whole healing wellness industry, medical industrial complex is so gaslighting. It's like, if you do these things, you will get better. Mm-hmm. And as so many of us know, that's not true. Mm-hmm. And I just wanted somebody to say that. And I also wanted somebody to say like you are not, like, A, it's not your fault. And B, like you are a product of your environment. Mm-hmm. And just like really wanting to look at and I Gabor Mate talks about this in his new book, how like you can see in the telomeres in your DNA the impact of our social problems. Like it's real. Yeah. It's not just something that like organizers say, that like oppression has an impact on our health. Like it is, through epigenetics, we really know this to be true. And so I want, like, so the book is like I say it's a politicized but lighthearted guide to the mental, emotional, and spiritual aspects of healing chronic illness. Because even just those aspects of healing don't get enough attention. Mm-hmm. And part of what I'm trying to bring to it is like, you need to always, well, I guess I don't want to say it that way, but successful healing is always personal and collective. Mm-hmm. And so even just like, and that could mean even just bringing other people into your healing. I think one of the things that is so devastating for so many people with chronic health challenges is the isolation. Mm-hmm. And it's so easy when you're isolated to just look at like everybody around you who gets to do all these things that you don't get to do. And like I this has happened to me too. Like when I feel embarrassed admitting this, but when we all went into lockdown for pandemic, part of me was like, now y'all know what it feels like, Mm-hmm. Like, so like some of us have been living this way for years. Like, and yes, I will teach you how to use Zoom because I have been using it for years. But like, yeah, it's so easy to become really disconnected, which is the opposite of what you need in healing, right? Connection, like healing is connection, and healing, there's I can't remember her name right now, but there's a quote like, healing happens in community. And I know that to be true in so many ways. And so just wanted the book to help facilitate that for people. So it's like half of a how to, like how to heal. And I talk about, you know, like how to train your brain, how to get in touch with your intuition. I talk about polyvagal theory and the nervous system, because it's really important for people to have some awareness of that. And yeah, like Mike, the other day, I introduced my therapist to polyvagal theory.
Wow.
And I was like, I understand that you don't know this, and like it's ridiculous that you don't know this. But I mean, like I have a friend who's a therapist, and they didn't even talk about trauma in his program. But anyway, yeah, so that's some of the stuff I talk about, but I also talk about how do you enroll support, like how do you create a team and a community, and how do you notice where oppression lives in you, and really deprogram that as part of your healing. And that's like a big part of healing being a contribution, right? Yeah. When you are doing that work, you liberate yourself, and you can be more successful in creating liberatory communities around you and liberating others. So I think that's what I have to say about that.
Yeah. I'm going to invite you to go a little bit deeper on some of this, because I think it could be really valuable for me and for the listener. And I would say one immediate reflection I have before the question is that when you talk about healing as an individual, but also as a collective, I think there's multiple ways that we can look at this. And one of them is that if you really embody the healing work that you're doing, or if I speak about myself, I know that when I am embodying my healing work, then I am more settled, my nervous system is more regulated, that whether other people I encounter are conscious of that or not, we are always kind of meeting each other where we are. So just like being around other regulated nervous systems helps to settle us down. Or if we're around other dysregulated nervous systems, something's going to feel wonky and off. So there's always, no matter what, even if you're not consciously creating communities or actively creating something, if you are doing the healing work and are social in any way, are able to meet other people, there is a naturally compounding healing effect that I have seen it to have, that is, I think, worth naming in this conversation. It really makes a giant impact, and we all feel it when the energy's off of a room, or if the energy feels settled. I think I've heard people who haven't done any inner work talk about the energy of the room, and so I think we all can intuit what this means. I would also love, you talked about dorsal at one point, and polyvagal theory has come up. I would love to hear you speak a little bit about, maybe not, you don't need to go super deep into it, but I would love to hear you talk about polyvagal theory, the nervous system, and what that means in terms of regulation with yourself, with clients and communities, any way that you see fit.
Yeah, thank you for that invitation. I've been trying to do a deeper dive on polyvagal theory recently to make sure that I really know what I'm talking about. Because I had written a chapter about it, and I realized that it wasn't very clear or very accurate. And I haven't read Deb Dana's book. It's next on my list. And my understanding is that that's one of the best sort of introductions for folks. I've been reading a book that's for practitioners I think it's called Accessing the Healing Power of the Vagus Nerve by Stanley Rosenberg. And he actually, he goes really in depth about like, this physiological state is regulated by not just this part of the vagus nerve, but these other cranial nerves. And he provides like ways that you can, exercises that you can do physically or with other people to get back to ventral vagal, which is the state of social engagement. Yeah, what can I say about that? I mean, I think for people with health challenges or mental health challenges, this is like the key that unlocks 7 million doors. And like when I was explaining it to my therapist, she totally got it. She's like, forget mental health. And I was like, yeah, exactly. Because like when you see it through this lens, you can see that like people who, you know, have been taking pharmaceuticals either for physical or mental health for years might actually be able to shift their experience with just like a few like physical manipulations, like, you know, massaging a certain part of their chest, for example,
Yeah.
or like turning your head back and forth a few times. It's not quite that simple, but like pretty simple stuff. So I guess, like, should I give like a quickie overview, or like what do you think would be
Yeah, I
useful?
think it doesn't have to be technical terms necessarily, but I am
Okay.
super fascinated by, and I think everyone ought to be fascinated by, how can we be regulated so that we're more able to show up to life, basically, right? So like
Mm,
what is happening internally if we're reactive and triggered? How can we get back to being settled? Like what does all of that look like? So it doesn't, if you feel more comfortable just explaining what that looks like to you than to talk in polyvagal theory, I'm certainly open to that as well.
yeah. Okay. So yeah, so I guess I can say like, so there's like our state of social engagement, which is which is like where we want to be, right? It's like where we the place in which the physiological state in which we perceive safety.
Mhm.
And then there's fight or flight, and then we'll say there's freeze, and then there's like deep freeze, shutdown, collapse mode. And so if there's too much activation in one part of so there's like the two parts of the vagus nerve and the sympathetic chain. And so if there's too much activity in one part of the vagus nerve or in your sympathetic chain, then you can be sort of stuck in shutdown, collapse, or in fight or flight. I know in my body I have experienced both, and I have experienced a ping-ponging between the
Mhm.
two, or like just between all three. It's like
Mhm.
everything's good, everything's feeling great, and then all of a sudden my heart rate's way too high and I don't sleep for a month, and I feel like everything is like I'm just like jumpy and so sensitive and everything's so hard. And then
Mhm.
I'll like, you know, I've also experienced the deep freeze, the shutdown, collapse, which in my body doesn't always come with depression, but can come with like this really heavy feeling. When that happens, your muscles become really slack. So doing
Mhm.
like even like raising my hands above my head to do my hair becomes impossible. Like I had really short hair for 7 years because I couldn't hold my arms up long
Mhm.
enough to like brush my hair. And I now know that that's from too much activity in dorsal vagal,
Mhm.
which is really really interesting. And I think that there's things that we can do in like a everyday setting where like, okay, I'm noticing that my heart rate is high, that I'm feeling really activated. Then you can, I think breath work in particular is
Mhm.
really, really such a good tool, both for upregulation and downregulation. Um, and it's so nice to have access to those tools. And what I've found is that for some people, like, and in some cases, like that just really doesn't work. Like that's something that I've really learned in the last year since vaccine injury is like all my tools, everything I learned in yoga, everything I learned about breath work, like I couldn't really access it. Or like it would work for a little while and then it wouldn't be working anymore.
Mhm.
So I think I guess what I want to name too is like it's really good to learn all that stuff, and it's really important, or not really important, but it can be really useful to bring in professional support. And there's two kinds that have been really useful for me. One is working with a somatic coach, and one of the ways that they talk about it that has been really useful for me, especially recently, is there's the autonomic nervous system, right, which is involuntary, and then there's the voluntary nervous
Mhm.
system.
Mhm.
There's like all the resiliency that we can build up consciously uh, to support us, so that when our nervous system has a reaction, we have tools that we can bring to it. And some of that's just like can be like really grounding yourself by taking in your space, feeling supported in the chair, uh, standing in a certain way that your muscles are activated so that you feel strong and don't feel as permeable. I mean, I'm not a somatics professional, but there's like so much great stuff out there that's can be so useful for people that have experienced trauma, emotional or physical trauma. Like, so like the vaccine was like this like acute physical trauma. It actually did the same thing to me that like a concussion would do. And I found all those tools so useful and continue to find them so useful. And then I recently embarked on this journey with someone who's a craniosacral therapist, a physical therapist. They do visceral manipulation, all different kinds of body work. And she helped me realize that because of an old injury, which this might be like the root of all of my health challenges, there are many parts of my vagus nerve that have literally been pinched for like 20 years.
Wow.
And she's working on like bringing my body back online. And it's been an incredible and amazing and humbling experience. So like, yeah, like all the breath work, all the regulation exercises, it's amazing. And if you're in my situation, like there might be an opportunity for somebody to like help you on a physical level so that your nervous system can actually function properly.
The two things that I would love to maybe underline / add here, and then I would love to hear a little bit more from you. So practices that I have found very personally helpful, and we were talking a little bit before we jumped on here about My Grandmother's Hands by Resma Menakem, and he's got lots of great body practices, and several of the things that can be really helpful, and granted, I don't do all of them all that often, but there's chanting, humming. You can move like ankle joints, knee joints, hip joints. Like moving your joints can really help loosen up the body. Breath work and orienting yourself, which you named, right? Orienting yourself to the room and like kind of making sure your hips move and your psoas are rotating and seeing what's behind you. I can't believe how much safety that helps to establish and how settling it is for my nervous system when I'm in moments like that. And I think something else that I'm wanting to underline in this moment, which you've done a beautiful job of articulating, is that anytime that someone is super prescriptive or dogmatic, to me, that is a red flag, a major red flag about like this thing. If you just do this, this is going to work. And I have so been guilty of that. And it usually comes from a really good place because there have been so many things that have made a big difference for me and they've made an impact and I want to share that with people. But the more that I dive into the work, the more I realize that every single person is different. And in your personal story, hearing that the vaccine really caused a lot of damage for you is I think that that's going to activate a lot of people who are, all about medicine and are want to support doctors and I think that it on the other side, there are people who are all about natural healing and think that medicine is evil. And I want to underline again that anytime someone is only looking from one side of things, it's usually very incomplete. And I really appreciate the way that you have been naming that there isn't you have done what has worked for you, and that isn't going to exactly work for other people. But we're talking about so many different principles and practices that can be applied and tried on. So to that end, now I arrive at a question. Are there any other practices that we haven't already named that you think are helpful in terms of regulation? And another one maybe that I'll name is going for a walk outside and being immersed in nature, getting sunlight. But any other practices that you feel called to bring into the conversation?
Yes. Can I speak to something that you said a minute ago and then come back to that?
You sure can.
Okay, thanks. Because I think what you're naming is how much, and I don't know how much this is an American thing or a Western thing, or maybe just how our brains work, but people love binaries.
Yes.
They love them, especially on the internet. And I think like one of the beautiful things that that both queerness and chronic illness have taught me is that binaries are not real. They're just not.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that something that's so helpful in healing, and I mean healing in every aspect of the word, collectively and personally, a really important aspect of healing is understanding that there are complexities and that there are gray areas and that there's no, yes or no answers and there's no binaries. So I just wanted to name that because I think that in itself is a practice. And I think living into that is a practice for a lot of people because, I mean, there is a certain element that like our brains just like to create binaries, and especially like our limbic system is like, it's this or this.
Yes.
So I just wanted to name that.
Thank you.
And so grateful to the queer community, especially for showing me just how untrue that is. And then in terms of practices, I mean, I think that down regulation practices are kind of overemphasized. So I think I want to talk about upregulation practices. Sure. So bouncing up and down. It's pretty simple. It's really, really, really good. Right. So you can just like, if you're able to stand, stand with your feet flat on the floor, bend your knees a little bit and just kind of start jiggling. That can be really good. And then more active breath practices like breath of fire. Certain, like a lot of people love Wim Hof. It's a little too much for me, but like I respect it as a practice. And yeah, singing, humming, and just movement in general. I've been getting a lot out of dance lately. Even though I've been practicing yoga for, I don't know, 12 years or something, I notice, especially in this process of with this body work that I've been getting, it's easy for me to say like, okay, I'm going to do these poses because that's what I'm used to. But like, that might not actually be what my body wants. Whereas if I'm dancing by myself, I can really, and authentic movement is another good practice for this, but I can really feel into like, actually, I just want to explore what it feels like for me to move my arm this way. And just like focus on that for a while because there's no prescription. So yeah, so I think that like dancing can be an upregulation practice. I think even for people who might be bedbound or really limited in their movement, I mean, you can dance with your fingers and like even just like listening, if you can tolerate it, like listening to like dance music and imagining yourself moving like that. I don't know that there's science behind that, but I believe that can support people, to get into a different physiological state. But I mean, any kind of exercise in general can support you to get out of shutdown collapse and back towards ventral vagal.
Yeah, I mean, what you described at the end there is a different form of visualization, essentially, right? If you imagine yourself moving, there's probably a mechanism in your mind that makes it in the way that if I were to close my eyes right now and imagine that I was eating a scoop of ice cream or something, I would imagine that there would be some sort of dopamine response in my brain and that it would activate some pathways that are similar to the actual experience of, in your example, it'd be dancing. In my example, it'd be eating the bite of ice cream. So that is a really effective way to enroll the mind in the process, even if you are bedridden, like you said. And oh man, there's so many directions that we could go from here. One question that has been on the back of my mind for much of this conversation, so I'll invite it in now, is intuition has come up several times, and I'd be curious to hear, I don't know, have there been big choices that you've made in your life based on intuition? I imagine it's yes. And if so, what did it look like? What did arriving at that choice look like for you? And even more specifically, maybe it was something that it felt like, oh no, that can't possibly be what I'm really wanting, right? Like maybe the mind was having a tough time computing how that would happen, or something like that.
Hmm. Yeah. I know that's happened a bunch. I'm trying to think of an example. Um, a small example is Resma Menakem, since we've been talking about him, created this somatic abolitionist course. And when he was running his first cohort of it, I was trying to decide whether or not to do it. And part of me was just like, heck yeah, like I love his work. I'm definitely going to do it. But I think I was struggling because it was like a pretty big time commitment. And like, I think it was like 9 months. It was pretty significant. And I was struggling with it. And I asked actually our friend Nick Shrewsbury, I believe, to just kind of hold space for me to get clear with myself. And it was a hard no, and that was sort of surprising to me. And I was sort of asking my intuition why, and I was getting this message that like I really just like other things were going to come up that were going to need my attention, and I needed to not be immersed in anybody else's stuff, anybody else's like I don't know, frameworks. And it was hard for me to believe that. And then, okay, so I told you what happened when I took the vaccine. I was trying to decide whether or not to do the booster. And my intuition was very clearly like, you should get the booster and you should get the Moderna. And you
Wow.
should like talk to this doctor to get advice on how to do it. And I did that, and I did it, and it was fine. Wow. So, I mean, those are like a couple examples. Deciding whether or not to go to grad school, deciding whether or not to move. I mean, yeah, I use it a lot.
Yeah, those are great examples. I appreciate that. So something that we have been speaking about, but I would love to hear you explain even more, is the implications that healing work and somatic work, all the work that we've been discussing, just how that can really make an impact on social change, how it can disrupt our thinking around binaries, but just like what's the level of import of this work in your estimation?
The level of import. Hmm. Yeah, I feel like I've been talking about Adrienne May Brown so much, but she's coming to mind again because she talks about about the importance of stories, and how we can live inside of stories that other people created, which is like one way to think about the systems that we live in. And I think the importance of somatics and intuition is coming back to our own story, and being able to see what our own story is. And then I heard Dare Sohei on a podcast talk about the 4 pillars of attachment, being the body. I think I'm going to get this right. The body, the divine, ancestors, and the earth. And I think that only by fully embodying ourselves, being in our bodies, being connected to our intuition, which I consider intuition to also be connection to those things too. Like that is how we live in right relationship. Like when we are even just like a little more embodied, it's easier to love and respect other humans, to love and respect the earth, to be in touch with spirit. And like I really want to emphasize that, like it's not like there's this like oh, I have to be fully embodied or I'm fucking it up. Like even just like if everyone in America was even just like a fraction more embodied, like I don't think we would be having this like devastating political divide that we are experiencing right now. Like, we're recording this before the midterms, right? And like, I think a lot of people are just like, like, don't look, don't listen, it's so like, or like they're totally checked out. And I think that the crisis that we're in is a crisis of being disembodied. And when you're disembodied, it's really easy to be enrolled in other people's stories, to be enrolled in the story of the zero-sum game, for example, which is like, I think like Heather McGhee wrote this amazing book, The Sum of Us, about how basically all of our social problems in America come back to racism and to this zero-sum story that like, if these people get what I have, then I don't get it. Mm-hmm. And it's totally a lie, but that's like why we don't have healthcare and like why we have a housing crisis. And yeah, that was more than you asked me for, but I think that's my understanding.
It was not more than I asked you for. Yeah, I wanted to know why this work really is so important to you, and part of that question, at least my intention with the question, was to understand what's the impact on a societal level that this work can have, even if we just embody a tiny bit more, like you invited us into.
Yeah, and I think like I still, like, even like in the last few years, got sort of caught up in my own personal crisis. Like, working with people one-on-one isn't enough. Like you were saying about like making a bigger impact. I was like, I got to work on policy. We have to have like interdisciplinary, like healing-centered, trauma-informed policy. But this really incredible organizer, Latasha Brown, people don't know who she is. You should look her up. She co-founded Black Voters Matter. And I got to have like a 15-minute conversation with her. And one of the things she said is, she's like, do not underestimate the power of deep versus wide. And she said, the river is filled drop by drop. And like, I really encourage you to like give yourself permission to do this work with people one-on-one, because like, it's like, we need this too.
Yeah.
And that just, I was like, okay, if Latasha Brown says so, then like, then I'm good. So that's been helpful.
I love that. So there's a lot of the things that we have discussed that can feel heavy, right? They can feel, and we've even named that a lot of times with healing work, there's parts of our journey where we're like, oh, how much longer do we have to do this? How long is this going to take type of energy? And Adrienne Marie Brown, I want to invite her into the conversation even more. She wrote a book called Pleasure Activism, which I see right above you. I know that you and I have both read. And you also have, I don't have the full quote written down, so please forgive me, but you have on your website, there's a question that you ask, something along the lines of, how can we all live our lives with as much pleasure as Lizzo lives her life with? And it's a long-winded question asking basically, how can we address all of these giant things, but also without undermining joy and pleasure? And maybe even more specifically, why is it important to experience joy and pleasure while doing this type of change work?
I feel like I'm 100. Well, I feel like I'm not an expert on this. Like, I'm very much still a baby in the like, yeah. I think the Lizzo quote is about like loving yourself as much as Lizzo does, and I think pleasure and loving yourself go hand in hand, because part of allowing yourself to, you have to love yourself enough to allow yourself to experience pleasure, to prioritize pleasure. I think like I'm a workaholic in recovery. Because like I got sick and I couldn't have, drugs or alcohol or any, like not even coffee for a while. My addictive personality was like, I'm going to work all the time. And it was like work all the time. And then like, spend all my money on medicine. And so like, I also got into this pattern of really depriving myself and like really withholding pleasure, because it was like, the most important thing is to like grow my business and like get better. And there's just like no time for anything else. which, as you can imagine, is like a terrible way to live. I was not a happy human. And so, yeah, I mean, I think pleasure again is integral in healing and change, because those are the same thing.
Mhm.
But I just also think it's our birthright. And I
Mm.
think that like it's part of being an embodied being, it's part of being in connection, it's part of being in right relationship, is experiencing pleasure, and like experiencing the pleasure of being alive. And I think that's part of how I came back to it, was spending more time in the natural world, spending more time in the woods specifically, and just allowing myself to be in awe,
Mhm.
and the pleasure of being in that awe. Like, holy shit, I got to see a barred owl, like how cool is that? And like,
Mhm.
there's a bunch of turkeys in the trees, like wow. And like, you know, look at the I feel like I'm just wanting to talk about birds, but like,
Yeah.
or the river. Like I live in a town, there's 4 rivers here, and just being in the river in the summers, watching the river, seeing um like just the power of water.
Mhm.
And like there's so much pleasure for me in that. So I guess those are some of the things I think about.
Yeah. Beautiful. Well, Noelle, as we move towards the back end of the interview, I want to invite in maybe a couple of other things. You could take it in any direction you want to, but
Mhm.
uh, writing as a form of healing is something that you
Mm.
teed up to discuss. Let's actually just go with that. That seems very alive for me too. I have found writing, especially in the past couple of years, to be immensely healing for me. And whether that's journaling or me just putting thoughts out that I'm going to eventually share with the world, uh, could you speak about why you feel writing is so important personally for you, and why it's healing?
Yeah. Well, I run semi-regular writing salons, and would love to have you sometime,
Mm.
Mike, if you're a writer too. And yeah, I wrote a lot when I was younger, and I had some lovely teachers who told me that I was a great writer, and you know, I journaled, and I when I was little, you know, when you know you're in kindergarten and people ask you what you want to be when you grow up, like I wanted to be a children's book author. I was like, I'll draw the pictures and write the story, it'll be so great. Um, and then I guess in part because I got sick and I was all like on this like activism organizing kick, I just didn't write for like 10 years.
Mm.
And then I got a scholarship to attend a week-long workshop for it was like, I think it was writing for people with chronic illness or something. And I met someone who's now one of my best friends in the whole world there. So that was amazing. She's a writer too. But I was just like, oh, writers are my people.
Mm.
Writing is my thing. Like, how did I forget?
Mhm.
And that's in part because it was such a healing experience. We did this cool thing where we coming back to Katina Makris was one of the co-teachers, and we were writing through the chakras, and which is like pretty intense thing to do. So you know, sexual assault I had forgotten about came up, like
Mm.
all kinds of stuff came up. And so going through the chakras was paired with this approach to writing called gateless writing, which is really focused on um, supporting people to write from kind of their deepest well, like their most authentic voice. And part of how that's done is it takes the sort of patriarchal criticism model and turns it on its head. So when you are giving feedback about people's work, you're really just focusing on what's working in the writing. And so
Mhm.
as a writer, when you're hearing that, and that's what you're hearing, you naturally write more towards that.
Mm.
It's almost like a peer pressure thing. It's like, oh, people like this. So,
Uh-huh.
but because people know that they're not, I think this is how it works. Because people know that they're not going to get criticized, they write about their deepest
Mhm.
stuff. And so sometimes that's like dark dramatic stuff. Sometimes it's like it just like sounds like it's like channeled from the divine. It's like so beautiful. And so I've been running So I got trained in gateless writing with Suzanne Kingsbury, who created it. She's amazing. Also, chronic illness survivor. And yeah, so I started my salon, I think in like May of 2019, and then we did it in person in Boston and then online through the pandemic. And it continues to be such a healing space. And I mean healing like in every sense of the word. Like it is a place for people to process just like what's going on in the world. But just like whether people have writing experience or not, like the writing is so beautiful every time and so powerful every time. And I think that it's because people are just like, it's just expression. And I think expression, I don't think this is talked about enough. I think expression creates connection.
Oh yeah.
And expression is also a portal back into our bodies. So there's a way in which writing can create embodiment. And I like to combine the two. So like in our writing salons, we'll like have a dance party and then we'll sit down and write. And and it's just the best. I just love it so much. And yeah, I mean, there's a way in which like writing in the salons and writing my book has been immensely powerful for my healing. And I think part of it is also being heard. Like I've done the salons where I have shared what I've written, and I've done it where I haven't shared what I've written, and it always feels better when I share. Like there's something about being witnessed in that. It's part of the healing and community thing. I think it just creates another possibility for that.
Yeah, and I would love to hear you quickly. That's actually exactly where I wanted to go. Just talk about maybe other communities that have been integral for your healing, or if nothing comes to mind, just why you feel that community has such a wonderful impact on our healing.
Yeah, well, I'll say like something. Yeah, I think I have a couple thoughts. So I think a lot of people go to activism because they're looking for a community, and then they, I think this is getting better all the time, but I think there's a lot of disembodiment and therefore toxicity in activist communities, and that's a bummer. And I think I've seen the same thing in support groups for people with health challenges. Like people go there for a community, and then if it's not well facilitated, or if it's not facilitated by somebody who has some sense of embodiment, it's like really toxic and traumatic. Like if anyone's ever been in a poorly run Lyme disease support group, like, ooh, it's so bad. But if it's well run, it's beautiful. It's beautiful. Like my friend Carrie Ann Lang runs incredible support groups for Lyme, for long COVID. She runs art therapy groups. Like there's definitely really good resources out there. So if any of your listeners, are looking for that kind of community, like it does exist. I would just say like, use your intuition. Is it a good fit for you? I think one of the place where I really learned about healing happening in community was Afro Flow Yoga, which started with Leslie Salmon Jones and her husband Jeff Jones, who live in Boston. And I mean, it's Afro Caribbean dance plus yoga, which in itself is really healing and beautiful. But they just facilitate an incredibly healing container. Like they do introductions at the beginning of every class, so everybody knows who's there. And there's community announcements, and so it's like this beautiful combination of embodiment, of spiritual connection, of human to human connection, and yeah, that like they really set my healing journey on fire. I don't know if I'd be here today without that influence.
Wow. All right. Well, before I ask more back end, did I lose you? I lost you for a second, right?
Okay. Yeah, I'm back.
Cool. Well, Noelle, before I ask just a few more questions. Is there anything that we haven't discussed so far today that you would like to bring into the conversation now? Any threads you'd like to close? Anything at all?
Not that I can think of, Mike. I got to talk about a lot of the things I'm excited about. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Yeah, you're very welcome. It's I've learned so much in the conversation, and like I said, just a few more things for you. These are more rapid fire type of questions in nature. They do not have to be, you take as long as you want answering the question. But what is an ordinary everyday moment that brings you great joy?
Mm. I don't know, I've had the opportunity in the last year to spend a lot more time with kids.
Mm,
And I think just getting to hang out with young people and see the world through their eyes and hear their silly jokes and hear their questions and their interests has really been lighting me up lately.
mhm. Beautiful. What feels maybe most at your edge these days, or what's most alive for you as an area for development or growth?
Um, I mean, I think sticking with the book.
Hmm. Hmm.
And yeah, and coming back to it again and again, probably because I'm been working on it for a few years now, and at this point, somebody's helping me edit it, and it's like staying present to the moment that I'm in, and not sometimes it's easy to like start thinking about, you know, like turning it into an audiobook
Hmm.
or getting frustrated about how much there still is left to do. So I think coming back to the present moment, finding joy in the present moment. So like, you know, like being like, how cool is it that I get to learn more about polyvagal theory so that I can write a better chapter on it, and
Hmm.
just kind of re-enrolling myself in the step-by-step nature of the process.
Hmm. Hmm. What is something that folks would be surprised to learn about you?
I have never seen or read any Harry Potter.
My for a long time, my version of that was I've never seen or read any Lord of the Rings or any Star Wars or James Bond. I had three, and
Wow.
everyone was taken aback by all three of those. Yeah.
But has that changed?
I've seen one of the Star Wars and I've seen one of the James Bond movies. I still have a long way to go. I wasn't a big fan of the James Bond movie, but yeah, we don't need to unpack any of that for now.
Yeah, I
Uh,
am excited for you to see Return of the Jedi, though.
yes. Okay. We'll have to sync up, and I'll have to write about it in one of your writing classes at one point.
Perfect.
So before I ask the very last question, where would you invite folks to connect with you to see more about your work?
Yeah, good question. Instagram's good. I do have a monthly newsletter. It's pretty low key. It's only once a month, and I share, you know, I try to be generous in there, sharing a lot of resources that I create about career development and healing. So like in the one that's going out next week, I offer my 5 most underrated job search tips, but also podcast episodes about polyvagal theory.
Hmm.
And there's a hidden brain episode about emotions and how emotions aren't as fixed as we think they are. So uh, yeah, and the last one I talked about grief and resources for grief, and I've been in an herbal apprenticeship for the last 9 months, so I've been sharing a little bit of that. So if any of that sounds interesting, the email list might be a good place for folks.
Awesome. Yeah, sounds great. Well, the final question that I ask, I'm feeling the temptation to give you a menu of two, and you could choose whichever one feels best. Our shared community friend Andy Cahill in his
Mm,
podcast, he asked, "What's your fiercest hope for humanity?" A lot of times,
mm,
and so that's option one.
okay.
And how I typically end my interview is that the podcast is called Mike Search for Meaning, and I ask, what does it mean to you to live a meaningful life? So you can pick either one of those, whichever feels more alive, and would love to hear.
Mm. Yeah, Andy also has a great podcast. I love that
Yes.
guy. Wow, those are both hard questions though.
Take your time.
Meaning or fiercest hope? Yeah, I mean, maybe I can combine them together and say that I think that fierce hope is definitely what gives my life meaning. I think that's what I'm always motivated by. One of my favorite questions for people is kind of just like, what have you been thinking about or noodling on lately? And it's a question I love being asked too. And for me, I think it's something I've been noodling on a lot for a long time. Like, growing up in the DC area and sort of being a political person is just like, like how can we get to a place where we can work together to survive the climate crisis? And I think for me, like I do have a lot of hope that is possible. Like looking around in the day to day, it's like, sometimes more comfortable to just like put my hands over my eyes and just like, be like la 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 la. But yeah, I think I have fierce hope, and I just, part of the obsession with embodiment and somatics and stuff is like, assuming that we do survive as a species, like having some resiliency and some capacity to be with the heartbreak that is just already happening and an inevitable part of this process. And so I think, leaning into pleasure, fiercely loving ourselves and each other is my hope and what gives my life meaning.
Beautiful. And I'm also realizing that I totally forgot to bring in, there was a question that you wanted to be asked. I'm going to skip that, but an organization that you wanted to raise awareness for is Political Healers. And if you wanted to just speak about why that, why did you invite this organization? There's so many wonderful ones, but what's Political Healers? What do they do? And just like a minute or two about them.
Sure. Yeah. So I think like I'm kind of more on this, as I've spoken about, more on the side of like bringing politics into healing, and Political Healers is about bringing healing into politics. And it's an incredible organization run by BIPOC women and non-binary people, and who have a deep history in organizing and in healing both. And they they launched something called a Community Protectors Program, which I encourage folks to look into. They also run all different kinds of workshops. Like I attended a workshop they did a couple of years ago on what is trauma-informed practice and how do we bring it into organizing work. Like all the stuff a lot of the stuff we talked about today, like how do we bring that into the political space? How do we make sure that people have these skills and tools? So yeah, I give to them monthly. I really love their work. I think they're an incredible organization, and I'd love to see more people supporting them so that they can do more.
Yeah, it's hard to think of something more important, and I think that you could say that about first responders as well, people who are naturally working with lots of trauma. It's so important to be embodied and to be resilient, to be able to be with all of that, to be with the heartbreak like you named. So, Noelle, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the show. And we covered so much ground. I didn't know how we were going to be able to do it, but we made it happen. And yeah, I appreciate there's a humility that you bring to this work. There are many times in the conversation where I asked you something and you kind of disclaimed, I'm not an expert, but here's the way that I'm seeing it. And there was also a humility in what works for me isn't necessarily what's going to work for you. And I'm also seeing this deep commitment to serve and to, uh, yeah, to heal, to be the best version of yourself. And it's an incredible blessing to be able to have folks like you on my podcast. So thank you for taking the time to be here with me.
Thank you so much, Mike. I'm so grateful for the opportunity, and so grateful for you and the work that you do in the world too, and really appreciating this time. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. And to all the listeners, whenever you're listening, I hope that you have a wonderful rest of your day or evening, and take good care and lots of love.